What if the person you called stupid turned out to be the smartest lesson life ever gave you? The restaurant gleamed with glass and gold that night, packed with the city's wealthiest faces, laughter blending with the soft hum of violins. The Billionaire. CEO Alexander Reed sat at the center table, his phone in one hand, his ego in the other. He was the kind of man whose words made people tremble, whose signature changed lives, but humility was something he had never needed or learned. Standing near his table was Emma, a young waitress working double shifts to pay her brother's tuition. She moved quickly, balancing trays with quiet grace. When she reached Alexander's table, she smiled politely. "Good evening, sir. Would you like to start with water or wine?" He didn't look up from his phone. "Just bring the menu." She hesitated, then said softly, "The menu's already on the table, sir." He sighed heavily, glancing up. Finally, then smirked. "Maybe if you were smarter, you'd notice I'm busy," she blinked, his words hitting harder than she expected. Still, she kept her voice calm. "I'm sorry, sir, just doing my job." He laughed, shaking his head. "You're a waitress. Don't use words like job. Call it what it is." Serving. A few nearby guests exchanged. Awkward glances. Emma bit her lip and quietly walked away, hiding the sting behind her practiced smile. But what no one knew was that the man sitting across from Alexander had noticed everything. Mr. Patel, the chairman of a major international firm, watching quietly. His company was about to finalize a billion-dollar partnership with Alexander's. But in that moment, his expression changed. His gaze cold and disappointed. He turned to Alexander, speaking in a calm voice. "I think I've seen enough." Alexander frowned. "Confused enough of what Mr. Patel stood slowly of your character," he said simply. Alexander's eyes widened. "What are you talking about?" Patel looked toward Emma, who stood by the corner trying to disappear behind the counter. Said quietly, "You just insulted the one person who's been treating everyone here with respect. If you can't value people, you can't value partners." He placed his napkin on the table. "I don't do business with arrogance." He turned to leave as silence drowned the restaurant. Alexander stood, his pride cracking. "Sir, wait, this is a misunderstanding." Patel didn't stop. "If you think humility is beneath you, you'll spend the rest of your life surrounded by people who only pretend to respect you." Then he was gone, leaving behind a billionaire who had everything but manners. The restaurant had gone quiet. You could almost hear the sound of Alexander's pulse thundering in his ears. Every set of eyes was on him, but no one dared move. He stood frozen, the reality of what had just happened, sinking in a billion-dollar deal gone because of one careless insult. He glanced toward Emma, who stood near the counter, her hands trembling as she tried to hold back tears. She didn't want to look at him, but somehow did. Their eyes met, and for the first time in his life, the man who made empires fall felt small. He left without another word, his driver following in silence. The city lights blurred outside the car window. His assistant whispered from the front seat, "Sir, the Patel contract," he snapped. "Don't say it." I know. He leaned back, closing his eyes, but sleep wouldn't come instead. He saw her face again, calm, quiet, undeserving of the venom he'd thrown at her. The next morning, headlines exploded across every business page. Reed Corp loses $1 billion deal. After CEO's restaurant outburst, investors panicked. Stocks slid within hours. His board demanded an emergency meeting. He walked in and faced the storm, men and women shouting numbers at him, but their voices blurred until one question cut through the noise. "What happened?" He stood silent, then said quietly, "I forgot what respect feels like." The room fell still. That evening he returned to the same restaurant, alone. The manager nearly fainted at the sight of him. But Alexander raised a hand. "I'm not here for service, I'm here for her." Emma stepped out from the back room, her apron still on, her expression unreadable. He took a slow breath. "I came to say sorry. Not the kind that fixes headlines, the kind that comes from being wrong." She crossed her arms. "You humiliated me in front of everyone." He nodded. "You're right. And I can't undo that. But I can make sure it means something." She frowned. "I don't want your money," he smiled faintly. "Good, because I'm not offering any. I'm offering a position." She blinked. "A position?" He nodded. "You spoke with honesty when I didn't deserve it. My company could use someone who reminds me what that sounds like. I want you to lead our employee training program, to teach every manager in my firm what dignity means." Her mouth fell open. "I'm a waitress." He smiled. "Not anymore." Weeks later, the story turned again. Reed Corp. Rebuilds reputation. With new people, first initiative. Led by former waitress, and Emma's name shone brighter than his. She stood on stage beside him, giving her first speech, her voice steady. "Respect is free, but losing it is the most expensive mistake anyone can make." Alexander listened from the side, his eyes softer than they'd ever been. That night after the event ended, he said quietly, "You saved more than my company. You saved me." She smiled. "No, Mr. Reed, you saved yourself. The moment you decided to listen." Months passed, and the world began to see a different side of Alexander Reed. The headlines that once mocked him now spoke of transformation. The ruthless billionaire had turned into a man who showed up early to staff meetings, who walked the factory floors, shaking hands with workers, who once feared even saying his name, and the change wasn't born from guilt. It came from one night in a restaurant when a waitress refused to bow to his arrogance. Emma stood by his side through it all. Her program grew faster than anyone expected. Employees trained in empathy, leadership, and respect. Profits rose. But more importantly, so did morale. Alexander watched her lead boardroom sessions with a calm confidence that silenced even the loudest skeptics. The same people who once called her unqualified now looked at her like the backbone of the company. One evening after a long charity gala, the two of them stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights, the air cool, the sound of laughter fading below. Emma looked at him, smiling slightly. "Do you ever think about that night in the restaurant?" He chuckled softly. "Every day it was the most expensive mistake of my life." She laughed. "You mean the best mistake?" He nodded. "Maybe both," then added quietly, "You know, I used to think power meant being above people. Now I think it's about standing beside them." She looked at him with quiet pride. "Maybe you just needed to fall to see what humility looks like." He smiled. "Maybe I just needed someone brave enough to tell me I was wrong." The wind brushed through her hair, and for a moment silence settled between them, warm and easy. He said softly, "You taught me more than any investor or mentor ever did." She teased, "And you fired me before you hired me. That's a first." He grinned. "Guess I like doing things backward." Then his voice lowered a little. "Thank you for not giving up on me when I didn't deserve a second chance." She smiled. "You didn't need one. You needed a wake-up call." He looked at her for a long moment, the city glowing behind, her face lit by the soft light of change, the kind that doesn't happen overnight, but through 1,000 small acts of grace. He said quietly, "Emma, if that night had gone differently, I'd still be the man who thought respect was optional." She whispered, "Then maybe fate was just waiting for you to make that mistake, so it could teach you something." He smiled, a rare, real smile, the kind that reaches the heart, and said softly, "Then I guess you were my billion-dollar lesson." She laughed, shaking her head. "You needed it." Years passed, and the world almost forgot the arrogant man who once belittled a waitress. The name Alexander Reed became something new, something that meant fairness and second chances under his leadership. Reed Corp wasn't just a company anymore. It was a movement built on empathy and humility. But the real heart of it all was still Emma. She had gone from waitress to director to partner. In every sense, her ideas shaped the company's future. Her kindness shaped its soul. One morning she walked into his office. Sunlight streaming through the tall glass windows, she carried a report in one hand and 2 coffees in the other. He looked up from his desk, smiling. "The waitress brings coffee to the boss again." She laughed, setting 1 cup in front of him. "You'll never let that go, will you?" He grinned. "Never. It's how this story began." She shook her head, smiling. "You know, I still remember how angry I was that night. I almost quit humanity." He chuckled. "And I remember how blind I was that I almost lost the best thing that ever walked into my life." They sat together, going over plans for their next initiative, a foundation that would fund education for service workers around the world. When the meeting ended, she lingered by the window, gazing. At the skyline, he said softly, "You ever think about how far you've come?" She turned to him, smiling. "Only every day, but I don't think it's just me." "We both learned something that night." He nodded quietly. "Yeah. I learned that success means nothing if it costs you kindness." He stood beside her, their reflections merging in the glass, and for a moment neither spoke. The silence said everything. She finally whispered, "I never thought my worst night at work would become my best memory." He smiled gently. "Maybe that's how life works. Sometimes it humbles you before it blesses you." She looked up at him, her eyes soft, "And sometimes it hides the best people behind name tags." He laughed, low and warm, then reached into his drawer, pulling out a small box. She frowned. "What's that?" He opened it, revealing a golden pin shaped like a coffee cup engraved with her initials. He said softly, "For the woman who taught me that even the smallest voice can change an empire." She blinked, tears filling her eyes. "Alexander, I can't take that," he smiled. "You already did the moment you told me the truth." That evening, as they walked out together, the office lights flickered off behind them, leaving only the glow of the city below. She said quietly, "You really did lose $1 billion that night." He laughed, wrapping his arm around her waist. "Maybe I lost $1 billion, but I found forever," she smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Maybe that's what it was all worth. If this story made you smile, share it with someone who needs a reminder that accidents can turn into beautiful beginnings."